Welcome to my tutorial for Super Sprint for the NES. This is a good unlicensed game by Tengen. It's actually a pretty good game. I haven't played the arcade version, but I enjoyed this version. I thought it was good. The way the game works is it loops after the 7th stage. It starts on level 0, and after you beat level 6, I would say you can consider the game beaten, as it just loops after that point and repeats the same tracks. It does get harder, though. The main thing I noticed was that there was a few obstacles that appear. In Loop 2, you have these cones that appear on the road, and if you hit them, they'll slow you down, but it doesn't really make it much harder. And it didn't really seem like the opponent cars were driving that much faster, but maybe they do speed up a little bit. I didn't notice much of a change in difficulty at all. Until maybe the 3rd loop, there's an extra obstacle added with these barriers that move up out of the pavement, and that makes it a little bit more challenging because you still have the cones there as well. But after the 3rd loop, I saw a video, and there's no more obstacles that appear as far as I can tell. But my goal was just to beat the game. I ended up getting to level 14 before using a continue. And I played a little bit further on until I wasted my other remaining continues. I believe you get 3 continues, and I got to level 20, but the reason I started losing and fucking up was because I upgraded my acceleration, which totally, messed up my driving. So if I was going to do it again, I would only upgrade my traction. Starting with, I upgrade traction first until it's maxed out at level 6. And the way you upgrade things is by collecting wrenches while you're driving. If you see a wrench, try to drive over it. And you will, when you collect enough of those, you can upgrade your various attributes. I would say start with traction, upgrade that to level 6. And then if you want to upgrade anything else related to your performance, I would go with top speed and just leave acceleration alone. I wouldn't even use it at all. But you can, if you're good, if you can drive well with acceleration turned up, then, go for it, obviously. Because it would be an advantage if you can move faster. But unless the opponent vehicles get much quicker on Loop 4 or beyond, I don't see a need for it at all. I think it would be fine just to leave that one alone. And you could actually upgrade your high score stat, which, if you go to where it says increase score, I think I don't know if it upgrades the amount of points that you get while racing, or if it just gives you a score boost, right there on the spot. I'm not sure how that works. I never used that one because I was only concerned with performance. I wasn't going for points. I just wanted to beat the game, which meant just beating where it says level 6. Once I beat that, I was satisfied that I beat the game. But, so I would, like I said, I would recommend start off just upgrade traction only. And then if you want to make any further upgrades, maybe go with top speed. That doesn't make your car too spastic, but once you start upgrading acceleration and top speed, especially the acceleration, it makes your car very sliding around very fast and spastic, easy to crash. It's a lot harder to control. And that's why I ended up losing. I probably would have kept going for a while. I may try the game again and not make those upgrades next time just to see how far I get. But yeah, so those are the basics as far as what to upgrade. I recommend leaving that acceleration alone. Start with traction and then do, once you max that out at 6, then do the high speed. As far as the game, it's very simple. I don't even know if there's a brake button because I never used it, but you just hold a button down to accelerate. So you just hold B to accelerate and you just turn using left and right. It takes a little bit adjusting to with the strange viewpoint. But you'll see exactly how it works. It's pretty much a pick up and play type of game. So you'll see what exactly how that works when you try it. You do want to be ready if you are going to hit into that tornado on the screen or an oil slick. Those are going to spin you out. And you kind of want to plan if you're about to hit it. You want to be able to correct yourself quickly and just keep moving, which takes a little adjusting to. You have to adjust, which way you're facing, because you don't want to just accelerate blindly out of a spin out, because you may just crash into a wall. Your car won't explode, though, unless you hit a wall at a high speed, and it just loses you a little bit of time because you have to wait to respawn. But it's It's not a huge issue if you're already ahead. You can recover from it. The other thing to notice the there's no arrows on this version. I believe the arcade version has arrows that show you like the direction you're supposed to drive. So just pay attention to the way I'm driving around the course. That's the order in which you have to go around the track. Because there are multiple turns at this cross section that I could be making, but you got to do it in the way that I'm doing it, or it won't even count. You won't get any credit towards your laps. After you make a certain amount of laps, you will win. But you can't place second. You have to always place first. Or you'll go back out to the continue screen. And I believe you have 3 continues. So, basically you want to try to accelerate as much as possible. But if you're, when you're getting used to the game, you want to let off the acceleration in bursts a little bit and use it in bursts so that you can maneuver, and get around the tracks. Because... this is the 6th level. This is the final level. And for this level, I found I did best when I mostly held the acceleration and just whipped around the turns. And, I try to minimize letting off the acceleration at all if I can. There are a few little segments where I'll let off acceleration a little bit when I feel like I have a little bit of a lead, but for the most part, I'm holding down the acceleration and I'm just turning while accelerating at max speed. Now remember, I didn't upgrade my acceleration at this point. I'm not even sure if I upgraded top speed at this point. So I don't move that fast, but I keep accelerating so that I can whip around the turns, because if you try to slow down and make the turns carefully, it's very easy to lose this level. This level can be pretty tricky at first. What I did was I used save and load states on an emulator to practice this stage a decent amount until I was able to beat it one time. Which is not very good practice, but for me it was good enough. I figured I had the general idea of what I was going to do when I got back there, because it's a short game, so I wasn't too concerned with having to start over again. And when I got there, I was able to, to not only beat it, but I went for a pretty long time to the end of the 3rd loop, the final stage of the 3rd loop. So now we're on the 1st loop, and you'll see the only thing that's changed is there's some yellow traffic cones that basically explode on you when you crash into them. And they only slow you down a little bit. And enemies can hit into them too, and I think, when I don't think they respawn, so if you break them, I don't think they come back. So, they're not much of a threat. And I didn't notice the cars driving that much faster. Maybe they were driving a little faster, but I was already decent enough to where this wasn't a problem. If you beat the 6th stage on the 1st loop, then you're going to be pretty decent at maneuvering through all these other stages, because all the other stages are easier than the 6th stage. So you shouldn't have a problem at this point. But yeah, I recommend using save and load states on that 6th stage on the 1st loop and just practice it. Make sure you can at least beat it. But my main tip is to just get used to holding down the accelerator the whole time and just making the turns at full speed. And, obviously you don't want to have your acceleration or top speed maxed out, especially the acceleration. Top speed is okay, but even that makes it harder, because you're going to be moving faster once your car builds up speed. Top speed means that your car will have a higher top speed once it's been accelerating for a while. It'll get to a higher top speed when you upgrade that. Acceleration is how quickly you go from a dead stop to a high speed. So, upgrading that's going to make you go fast in a very short amount of time, and it makes it harder to control the car. Traction is great because it makes you pretty much stick to the road with very little drift. So traction was the main thing for me, because once you get used to the traction and the track layouts, you can really whip around the tracks. And, you won't be drifting a lot, so you're not going to be wasting time sliding around. You're just going to, be gripped to the road. So I found that to be the best upgrade. I may try this game again and try to go for a higher score just for fun. But I was only looking to beat it at this point. Maybe if I get a high score, I'll do a tutorial and go into a little bit more detail. But there's really not much else to explain. The oil slicks and the tornadoes are the only things that spin you out. Anything else will either stop you or crash you. It depends how hard you hit. If you hit something at a high speed, you usually explode, and then you have to respawn. And that can cost you some time. So now I'm starting to upgrade high speed next. I maxed out traction. So I believe I went with high speed next. And eventually I do max out the top speed. But yeah, you'll see the more upgrades I make, the worse I start driving when it's anything but traction. Like the traction helps me every time, but anything like even top speed, I notice that it kind of messes me up because I'm not used to driving with that, with that extra upgrade. When I practiced on save and load states, I practiced with the traction pretty high for the final stage, but I didn't practice with higher acceleration, higher top speed or acceleration, neither one. But acceleration messes me up the most. So that's the last thing I would recommend messing with. You might even, want to not use it at all. But you can learn how to deal with, higher acceleration with more practice if you find it useful. But I don't know that the game gets that much harder on further loops. I'm not even sure if it gets much harder. But really, this tutorial was just intended just to beat the game, just to beat the first loop. I'd have to get farther into the game to see how much harder it really gets. This is still on my first credit, so I was doing pretty good at this point. And I end up getting to about stage 14 before I lose my first continue. There are no lives. It's basically if you lose a race, you go out to the continue screen and you can continue. But I believe you only get about 3 continues. It's a very simple game, and it didn't take too long to learn. I think it took me about an hour and 8 minutes to beat. And once I beat it, like I said, I got pretty far. When you have a comfortable lead, you don't have to worry as much about holding the acceleration the whole time. You can kind of pulse it a little bit and keep a manageable speed. But sometimes you really have to be able to hold the acceleration down and whip through the turns, especially if the cars get ahead of you. Sometimes it's important to be able to do that to get back in the lead. The cones I don't worry too much about. I try to avoid them, but they don't really slow you down too much. You'd, of course, grab the points. Those are optional, but if you're going for a score, you can try to get those. It's a pretty good game. For a Tengen game, it's quite good. Some of their games weren't too good on the NES, but they had some decent ones. It was mixed with them. They had some games that were quite good, and then they had some pretty shitty games, like Shinobi for NES I owned by them, and that was bad. But Rolling Thunder was actually a cool game. That was a good game. So now I'm getting close to maxing out my top speed. And I complete the second loop, I believe. This is the last track of the second loop. I believe I completed this without losing a continue, so I was still going pretty strong. But my performance starts to decline. I start crashing more the more I upgraded top speed and eventually acceleration is what finished me off. So, in hindsight, I would have upgraded differently. I would have, if I was trying to do well at the game and get farther, I would start off by only upgrading traction and then maybe maxing out top speed. And then after that, I would put all the wrenches into my high score for getting more points. That's another thing you can upgrade. I think it just says score. So if you want more points, you can try doing that. That's what I would end up doing. I wouldn't waste points on the on acceleration probably at all. Not for the first 3 loops, anyway. I can only comment on the first 3 loops because I didn't get any farther. And I did watch a video, and it didn't really look like the 4th loop was that much faster to me, or I couldn't tell a difference. But maybe if I played it, I would notice it. It's hard to tell in a video for me. So yeah, this is the first track of the 3rd loop, and this is where I finally fucked up and lost a continue. And I think that was after that was either after upgraded my acceleration or maxed out my top speed, one or the other. But like I said, those settings started to throw me off. It was really the traction that made the biggest difference. You know, you could probably beat all 3 loops pretty easily by just sticking with traction and not upgrading anything else. Maybe just putting the rest into points. But, you know, I can probably safely recommend upgrading like top speed. I don't think that's too detrimental. I think that could be helpful. It probably did help me a little upgrading my top speed. You know, but acceleration was a clear fuck up for me. Like, without practicing and adapting to the higher acceleration, I'd have to practice that. I only spent, like I said, an hour and 8 minutes on the game total, so I didn't spend a lot of time mastering it at different accelerations and trying to get real far. But I enjoyed the game, so it's a game that I might try at least once more to try to get, farther by doing different upgrades, like I mentioned. I like these kind of arcade-style games. The arcade one may use some kind of special controller. So if I play it on MAME, I may need to configure it to analog controls or something like that. I see some of those games that have strange controller setups. I never set up on MAME, so that's why I don't play some of those games, because I just never set them up. But it may not be too difficult to do. It's probably not. So yeah, my score did reset on level 14 since I lost a continue. Whenever you lose a continue, your score resets to 0. If you're going for score, then, keep that in mind. There doesn't seem to be any turbo boost or anything on the A button, as there was in this other game I beat that was a lot like this. I can't remember what it is now, but also on the channel, it's another NES game. It's called Indie Heat. Yeah, it has a name. It has some guy's name. Maybe it's Danny Sullivan's Indie Heat. I can't even remember, but I beat it pretty recently. And that game is very much like this. So if you like this, you'll probably like Indie Heat on the NES as well. Very similar to this. That was also a fun game. It had similar control. It also had turbo that you could use. I like that one. I know that the off-road games are also in this style. I never really played those too much, if at all. But maybe I'll try some of those. I know there's an off-road game on Super Nintendo with this weird perspective. It might be enjoyable. I haven't really tried those. Of course, RC Pro-Am was a classic game, but it's not beatable, really. I think there is a loop. I guess you can play it to a certain point and consider it beaten, but that's one I never got that far in. For games like this, I have my own rules about considering them beaten, as far as where the game loops. Because I list games beaten, so in building that list, I made my own rules for certain things. Like arcade games, as an example. There's arcade games that you just put in money just to beat the game, and you start exactly where you died. So on MAME, those games offer no challenge because you're not limited into how many coins you can put in. You just put in more virtual credits. So I call those games coin waster arcade games, no penalty for death, basically. Unless you're trying to do a 1 credit run, but I don't do that too often. So if I do a 1 credit run or something like that, I'll consider that a console-style game. But I have 2 lists for arcade games. Console-style arcade games and coin waster-style arcade games. And the console-style ones are the ones that I really like to add to my games beaten list. Because those are games that have some kind of penalty for death. So I separated those in my list. The coin waster-style games, I don't really play a lot of them because I really don't find much satisfaction in just paying to win. If I was going to try to play a game like that, seriously, I'd try to do it on low credits. But I don't really like having to implement my own rules into a game. I like when the game has its own restrictions. So I don't do a lot of those type of runs. But, I may start to do more of them as time progresses, just to change it up. So yeah, here you see I start to make some upgrades to my acceleration. Maybe this was my first acceleration upgrade. And this is when my performance starts going to shit. Look, see, I didn't even make that first turn. Totally fucked that up. So you can see, as soon as I upgraded my acceleration, my performance went to complete shit. So Unless you're ready, unless you're ready to handle that change, I would say avoid it. Or just practice it. See if you need it for the later loops. Because you may not even need it. If you're practicing on emulation, you can just make a save and you can just work your way into the higher loops, and practice that way. Because, you can always just reload if you fail a track. Just for practice. I never use save and load states on emulators to cheat in any way. I just use them to learn games. It's a much more efficient way to practice games. I always recommend that on all these old games. So yeah, this is the level where I finally ended up failing the final track of the third loop. And this is also the last loop where obstacles appear, it seems. So after this, it's just the same shit. But it may get faster, like I said. But yeah, this is where I started fucking up. And if I had messed around with that acceleration, I could tell that I would have easily beaten this again. But I was crashing way too much. I wasn't used to that spastic speed. The acceleration makes you take off really fast, and it's hard to get your turn adjusted correctly when you're coming from a dead stop. So it's very easy to hit in the walls and get stuck. I could see how it would be good to max out all your upgrades, though. I mean, if you're really, really good at this game and really used to the handling, you could probably really destroy the tracks. But like I said, I don't know that the game ever gets that difficult, even in the later loops. I didn't get far enough to say, I can only say that for the first 3 loops that I got to, acceleration was nothing but a hindrance for me. So yeah, it gets very sloppy. But yeah, this was a pretty fun game. It's definitely one that I would, probably like to play again. May try it again soon. Also, keep in mind that you can collide with the cars when you're racing in the same, when they're all close to you. But whenever you get to a cross section, you can actually pass through the cars. It doesn't let you collide with them when you're crossing. Kind of hard to explain, but if you look for it, you'll notice it. When you come to certain cross sections and the cars are passing by in front of you, you can drive right through them without crashing. It's just something to keep in mind. It means don't try to slow down when you're crossing them in those cross paths. Just drive through them and keep going. The only time you can collide with other cars is when they're in the same... See, I went through that red car. The only time you can collide with the cars is when they're in the same general vicinity as you, like when they're going in the same direction as you, I think. But when they're crossing around, like circling around and going on a cross path, you can just drive right through them. So, see, like that. You saw I drove through the blue car before I crashed into that wall. But yeah. I mean, really, there's not much to this game to understand about it. But yeah, that ends my run for now, and thanks for watching.